He bought the cheapest farm in the valley, but it already belonged to three giant women. Daniel Harlow had always been the kind of man who believed that life, no matter how messy or unpredictable, could be repaired the same way he repaired furniture, patiently, gently, and piece by piece. For most of his life, he took pride in that belief. He used to say that wood had a memory. You just had to listen to it long enough for it to tell you what shape it wanted to take. But now, as he drove his rusty blue truck along the twisting road into Redwood Valley, squinting through a windshield speckled with dust and sun glare, he wasn't entirely sure whether he still believed that broken things could always be fixed. He had just lost almost everything: his workshop in the city, his rented apartment, and the little community of customers who came to him whenever they needed a chair leg repaired or a desk smoothed and polished. A sudden rent increase had pushed him out, and his savings, already thin, had stretched only far enough for him to pack his belongings into cardboard boxes and leave before the landlord changed the locks. The only thing he hadn't lost was his determination. And that was what led him to the farm. People in Redwood Valley called it the Harper Farm, though nobody named Harper had lived there for decades. The real estate listing described it as old-fashioned, structurally challenged, priced for a quick sale. Daniel had laughed when he first read the description. Real estate language could make even a falling-down house seem charming. But when he saw the price, so low it looked like someone had dropped a digit, he felt a flicker of possibility. Even if the house was leaning and the barn was broken, even if the fields were overgrown and the roof needed work, it was still land. Real land. A place he could make his own, somewhere far from the noise of the city and the rush of bills and deadlines. A place where he could breathe again. A place where he could rebuild slowly the way he knew how. So here he was, driving past the wooden welcome sign that read Redwood Valley, a quiet place to grow, watching the road narrow as tall cedar trees reached toward the sky like watchful guardians. The valley was peaceful, with wide open fields, small cottages with smoke curling from chimneys, and distant mountains brushing pale clouds. It was the kind of place people described in postcards: calm, untouched, safe. But as Daniel continued down the main road, he noticed something odd. Whenever he stopped to ask for directions, people would glance at his truck, then at him, then at the printed address of the farm, and their expressions would tighten just a little. An older man outside the general store lowered his newspaper and stared at Daniel's paper slip for so long that Daniel began to wonder whether he had smudged the ink. Finally, the man cleared his throat and said, "You bought that place?" Daniel nodded. "Seems like a good deal." "Good deal," the man repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "Well, I suppose that depends on what you're looking for." Daniel tried to smile politely. "A quiet place mostly, something I can repair over time." The man folded his newspaper carefully. "Son, there's quiet and then there's quiet for a reason." Before Daniel could ask what that meant, the man stood up and walked back inside the store. It was as though the conversation had hit an invisible wall, one Daniel couldn't see or climb over. He encountered the same reaction at the gas station when he stopped to fill up the truck. The young woman behind the counter stared at the address with wide, uncertain eyes. "That farm hasn't had an owner in a while," she said softly. "People usually stay away from that patch of land." "Why's that?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone friendly so she would feel comfortable enough to explain. But she only shook her head and handed him his receipt. "You'll see." By the third strange response, Daniel began to feel the first faint ripple of doubt. Not fear, nothing that dramatic, just a quiet, nagging question in the back of his mind. What exactly is wrong with this place? But he had already signed the paperwork, already transferred the payment. And besides, he reminded himself, people in small towns often had stories or superstitions connected to old properties. Maybe someone once heard something in the woods or saw a shadow they didn't recognize. Maybe rumors had grown until everyone in the valley simply accepted them without revisiting the source. That sort of thing happened all the time, so he kept driving. The deeper he went into Redwood Valley, the quieter it became. The air smelled like pine and earth, and the road turned from pavement to gravel. His truck rattled, bouncing over dips and stones, but he didn't mind. He was getting closer. He could almost picture the fence he would build, the vegetable garden, the workshop he'd set up inside the barn. The thought warmed him. When the GPS finally chimed and announced that he had arrived, Daniel slowed the truck to a stop, turned off the engine, and stepped out. At first glance, the farm looked exactly like the listing, worn, tired, and completely ignored by time. The fence that once lined the driveway had collapsed on one side. The house, a two-story wooden structure with faded blue paint, leaned slightly to the right as though it were trying to escape the wind. The barn, sitting farther back, had a missing door and a patch of roof that sagged inward. Tall grass swayed gently around everything, reaching almost to Daniel's knees. But there was something else, too, a feeling in the air. Not dangerous, not unpleasant, just unusual, as though the land itself was waiting for something or someone. Daniel tried to brush the thought away. He wasn't the type to imagine mysterious energy in the ground. He preferred things he could measure, touch, repair. He walked toward the front steps, making mental notes about what needed fixing first. The porch boards had softened from years of rain. The railing was loose. The windows needed new frames. The chimney looked like it needed cleaning. "This is doable," he murmured to himself. "Hard work, but doable." He set his toolbox on the porch and tested the front door. It opened with a soft creak. Dust floated in the sunlight like tiny dancing flecks. The air inside smelled unused, like a closet that had been shut for too long. Yet despite the old smell, the house felt surprisingly calm. Not cold, not eerie, just quiet. Daniel walked from room to room, opening windows to let fresh air in. The living room was small but bright, with a stone fireplace that would be charming once cleaned. The kitchen had outdated cabinets but solid counters. The upstairs had two bedrooms, one small and one large, both with slanted ceilings and narrow windows that framed the mountain peaks beautifully. He felt something loosen inside his chest, a sigh he hadn't realized he was holding. This could work. This could actually be home. After he finished exploring the house, Daniel walked outside again to look at the fields. The land stretched farther than he expected, rolling gently toward the forest. The grass was tall and tangled, but beneath it, he could sense the soil was rich, the kind that could grow almost anything if given care. He imagined planting apple trees, maybe a small greenhouse, chickens one day. Or goats, though he wasn't sure he knew how to take care of goats. But learning would be part of the adventure. He walked toward the barn. Even in its broken state, it still held a kind of dignity. The beams were thick, the structure broad and sturdy. With repairs, it could become a workshop, a storage shed, maybe even a guest space someday. He stepped through the open doorway and let his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. Inside, dust lay thick on the floor and old tools hung on the walls. A wooden ladder leaned against the loft rail. Everything was still. But then something caught his eye. In the center of the dirt floor was a footprint. At least it looked like one. Except it was enormous, much larger than any footprint Daniel had ever seen. It was shaped like a human foot, but stretched out far wider, as though someone had scaled up a footprint by several sizes. The edges were deep, pressed firmly into the soil as if whoever made it carried great weight. Daniel blinked. Then he crouched beside it and touched the dirt lightly. It wasn't old or faded, it looked fresh. He straightened slowly, letting his gaze sweep the barn. Nothing else seemed out of place, but the footprint didn't make sense. He told himself it was probably just an impression left by a tool or a heavy piece of equipment someone had dragged through, something large enough to settle into the ground in a strange shape. Yes, that was logical. Still, he stepped back outside, glanced toward the fields, and felt the air shift slightly, as if welcoming him or watching him. He shook the thought away again. On his way back to the house, he passed the fence line and noticed something even stranger. A portion of the wooden planks had been moved aside. Not broken, not crushed, simply arranged into a neat stack as if someone with great strength had gently lifted them and set them down. No machine had done that, no animal either. Daniel frowned, brushing his fingers over the smooth wood. Each plank was stacked with surprising care, aligned almost perfectly. Whoever had done this wasn't trying to cause damage. They were tidying, but tidying what? He was still puzzling over it when he heard a distant sound, a low, soft thump, like something heavy settling onto the earth. Not sharp, not alarming, just large. He turned toward the woods, but the trees swayed peacefully, offering no clues. For a moment he stood completely still, listening. Then the sound faded. Daniel took a long breath. The farm was old. The land was wide, and the valley was full of stories he didn't yet know. There were probably natural explanations for everything he had seen. He told himself he would understand it all in time. For now, he was here, and this land, with its old house, leaning barn and mysterious calm, was his. And even though he didn't know it yet, the farm had never truly been empty. Someone else had been here long before him. And they were still here, watching, waiting, wondering who the new man was who dared call their land his own. Daniel woke up on his first morning at the farm feeling strangely rested. The house was old, the mattress was lumpy, and the room was chilly, yet he felt lighter than he had in months. For a moment, as sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, he forgot about bills, city noise, and long nights spent worrying about what would happen next. All he heard was the soft sound of wind moving across the tall grass outside. He stretched, stood up, and looked out the window. Mist hovered across the fields like a silver blanket, and the mountains in the far distance glowed with early light. Everything looked peaceful, so peaceful that he half wondered if he had dreamed the strange footprint in the barn and the neatly stacked fence planks. He washed up quickly and went downstairs to make breakfast. The kitchen's old floorboards creaked softly, and the faucet made a tired groan when he turned it on. But these little flaws only made the house feel more alive. He prepared a simple meal: scrambled eggs, bread he had bought from the town bakery, and a cup of coffee strong enough to wake a sleeping tree. As he ate, he thought again about the strange reactions he had received from people in town. Their worried expressions, the quiet warnings, the hints that the land wasn't as empty as the listing had suggested. It was probably nothing, he told himself. Small towns loved mysteries. Maybe the previous owner was unusual, or maybe the farmland had a reputation for strange animal sightings. Every old place had stories attached. Still, the memory of that huge footprint lingered in his mind. After breakfast, Daniel decided it was time to explore the rest of the property. He grabbed a notebook, a pen, and a measuring tape, planning to list all the repairs he needed to make. He also brought a thermos of coffee, because no journey, no matter how small, should be done without caffeine. The morning air was crisp as he stepped outside. The tall grass whispered softly with every step he took, brushing against his jeans. The sky above was a bright, promising blue dotted with a few white clouds that looked like scattered cotton. He walked toward the barn first, wanting to check the footprint in daylight. As he approached, the old wooden beams cast long shadows across the ground. The barn door dangled crookedly on one hinge, moving slightly whenever the wind passed through. When he stepped inside, birds fluttered above him with a burst of wings. Dust swirled in thin golden beams of sunlight. Daniel moved toward the center of the barn, his heart pulsing a little faster. The footprint was still there. He knelt and studied it carefully. The shape was clear and unmistakable, like a human foot, but far, far larger. He placed his hand beside it, and his hand looked tiny in comparison. The edges were deep and smooth, not crumbled like something old. It looked fresh, very fresh. Daniel swallowed and ran a hand through his hair. He tried to imagine what could have made such a mark. A large piece of machinery, maybe, something with a flat edge. But no, the shape was too natural, too defined. He stood and looked around the barn again. Everything was still and quiet, except for the soft flutter of the birds and the distant rustle of wind moving through the fields. He walked outside, thinking he should check the fence where he found the neatly stacked planks. As he neared that part of the property, he slowed down. The planks were still neatly arranged. Nothing had changed. But now, in the bright morning light, he noticed something else, faint impressions in the ground around the stacked wood. They were not as clear as the footprint in the barn, but they looked similar, large, wider than any normal step. Daniel crouched and touched the soil lightly. The indentations didn't seem threatening. They weren't chaotic or destructive. If anything, they looked gentle. Almost careful, he rose again with a thoughtful expression. Someone or something had been here, and whatever it was had enough strength to move heavy wooden planks without breaking them. He walked back toward the house slowly, trying to make sense of everything. He wasn't frightened, just puzzled. The land felt calm, even comforting. If there was something unusual here, it didn't feel harmful. As he reached the porch steps, he heard something again, a low sound, somewhere far in the distance. Not loud, not frightening. Just a soft thump followed by another, like the sound of someone taking large, steady steps on soft earth. Daniel stood still, turning his head to listen more carefully. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was coming from the direction of the forest that bordered the back edge of his property. He squinted toward the trees. The forest was thick, filled with tall trunks and sweeping branches. Sunlight slipped between leaves like tiny falling stars. Nothing moved. and yet the faint rhythmic thumping continued for several seconds before fading into silence. He waited quietly, almost expecting the sound to return, but the forest remained still. Finally, he let out a slow breath. Probably an echo from the hills, he told himself, though he wasn't entirely convinced. To clear his thoughts, Daniel decided to walk the full boundary of his land. It would help him understand the layout and maybe spot any other things that needed fixing. He followed the fence line, sometimes brushing away vines or stepping carefully around patches of uneven ground. He soon reached a wide open field where the grass barely reached his ankles. The sunlight felt warm on his face, and the scent of earth filled the air. As he walked across the field, he noticed something unusual again. The grass in one long stretch looked pressed down, as though something heavy had walked through recently. The path was wide, much wider than a person or an animal would make. He followed the flattened trail for several minutes until it curved toward the forest again. But instead of entering the trees, the path stopped at the edge and vanished, as if whatever made it had stepped lightly over the boundary or disappeared altogether. Daniel stood at the forest's edge, staring into the shade between the tall trees. He felt a strange sensation, not fear, not discomfort, but curiosity mixed with a gentle awareness, as though the forest held a quiet intelligence of its own, watching him as much as he watched it. He took a step back, deciding not to enter the woods just yet. He had plenty to do on the farm before exploring deeper territories. Besides, he wanted to approach the forest with a clearer mind and maybe better equipment, like boots and gloves. By noon, Daniel found himself back at the house, tired from walking but full of thoughts. He made himself a light lunch and sat on the porch steps, sipping cool water. The valley was so quiet that he could hear the soft hum of distant insects and the rustle of wind high in the trees. As he rested, he wondered again about the previous owner. Why had they left so suddenly? Why had the price been so low? And why had no one else wanted this beautiful land? A warm breeze brushed his face, as if answering him with silence. Determined to keep working, Daniel grabbed a hammer and returned to the front porch to fix the loose railing. As he worked, the occasional creak of wood and tap of nails created a steady rhythm that calmed his thoughts. He didn't notice the first trembling at all. It was too gentle. The second one felt like someone dropping a heavy sack on soft ground nearby. But he still didn't look up right away. It wasn't until the third tremor, slightly stronger, that he paused mid-swing. He waited. Nothing. Then another tremor, soft but unmistakable. He lowered his hammer slowly and stood up straight. The ground wasn't shaking. It wasn't an earthquake. It felt instead like a distant, rhythmic movement, something heavy walking somewhere across the property. He listened carefully. Thump, thump, the sound was slow, unhurried, almost thoughtful in its pacing. Daniel walked down from the porch and turned toward the direction of the sound, the open field near the barn. He shielded his eyes from the sun and scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. No animals, no people, not even a breeze. And yet he could still sense the faint vibration in the ground, as though the earth itself was carrying the memory of someone's steps. "Hello," he called out, though he wasn't sure who he expected to answer. The valley replied with silence. After a moment, Daniel chuckled nervously. "I'm talking to the wind now," he muttered to himself. He returned to his repairs, and the tremors gradually faded, but the mystery stayed with him. Later in the afternoon, he decided to take a break and sit inside the house. As he stepped into the living room, something caught his eye. The curtains near the window were moving slightly, though the window was fully closed. He walked over and lifted the fabric. The window was secure, yet the curtain kept swaying lightly. It was as though a soft breeze had entered the house, even though no door or window was open. He frowned thoughtfully. It wasn't alarming, but it was odd. Slowly, he touched the windowsill. The wooden surface felt cool but not cold. Nothing seemed unusual. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had recently passed by outside. He looked out the glass. For a brief moment, he thought he saw something large moving between the distant trees. A shadow, tall and broad, slipping quietly behind a trunk. But when he blinked, the shape was gone. "Probably a trick of light," he whispered. Evening approached gently. The sky changed from bright blue to soft gold, then to warm pink. Daniel cooked dinner, cleaned his tools, and sat on the porch once more to admire the fading light over the valley. Despite all the strange signs, the footprint, the careful stacking of wood, the rhythmic tremors, the pressed grass, the shifting shadow, Daniel didn't feel unsafe. If anything, he felt like the land was aware of him in a curious, observing way. It didn't feel like he was living on empty land. It felt like he had stepped into a place that already had a story of its own, a story he had not yet been invited to understand. He sipped his drink and watched the sky darken into night. Stars appeared one by one, tiny and soft, as though the heavens were gently waking up. Somewhere in the distance, the faint thump of large, steady footsteps echoed across the land again. This time, Daniel didn't stand or look for the source. He simply listened. Because deep inside, he sensed something important. Whatever was moving out there wasn't trying to scare him. It was simply living its own life. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was waiting for the right moment to introduce itself. Daniel woke up earlier than usual the next morning, long before the sun had fully climbed above the mountains. He didn't know what exactly had woken him, maybe the soft glow of morning light, or maybe the feeling that today would be different. Something in the air felt new, like a page in his life was waiting to be turned. He stretched, washed up, and wandered into the kitchen to make coffee. But even as he poured the water and listened to the gentle drip of the machine, he kept glancing out the window toward the forest. The events of the last 2 days stayed clear in his mind. The giant footprint in the barn, the carefully stacked wood, the wide flattened path in the grass, and those distant, heavy footsteps that he heard but could never see. Today, he told himself, he would try to understand the truth behind all of it, not by searching blindly, but by paying attention. By listening the same way he listened to wood in his workshop, calmly, patiently, respectfully. After finishing breakfast, he stepped outside and breathed in the crisp morning air. A gentle breeze brushed his face, and the tall grass danced softly around him. As he walked toward the barn, he felt a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. He wasn't afraid, not in the way someone might fear a storm or a wild animal. It was a different kind of feeling, like standing before a door and knowing that something important awaited behind it. The footprint in the barn was still there, and as he looked at it again in the early light, he noticed something he hadn't before. The imprint wasn't alone. Next to it, partly hidden by a patch of dust, was another impression, slightly smaller but still far larger than any human footprint. Daniel crouched down carefully. The shape was clear, not one giant foot, but two side by side. Whoever had walked inside the barn had not been alone. He touched the dirt lightly with his fingertips. The impressions were deep, fresh, not more than a day or two old. The thought filled him with wonder instead of worry. Someone, or perhaps several someones, had been visiting his barn gently, not forcefully. They hadn't broken anything, hadn't disturbed the tools, hadn't damaged the structure. They had simply been there. He stood slowly, wiping the dust from his hands. The sun rose higher, casting warm golden light through the open barn door. Dust sparkled in the air like tiny glowing particles. Everything felt strangely calm, as if the land itself was preparing for him to notice something. Then he heard it. A soft thump, followed by another. Not distant this time, not faint, closer, much closer. Daniel turned toward the field beyond the barn. The grass moved gently, but he saw nothing unusual at first. Then he heard the soft, rhythmic sound again, like large steps making contact with the earth, each one steady and deliberate. Thump. His heart beat a little faster, but he kept his steps slow and controlled. He didn't want to startle whatever or whoever was coming. As he reached the middle of the field, the sunlight brightened and the breeze slowed. He felt as though the whole valley was holding its breath. Then something incredible happened. From behind a row of tall cedar trees at the far side of the field, a huge shape appeared. At first, he thought he was imagining it, a trick of light or a wandering shadow. But the shape became clearer as it moved, growing larger, rising higher, until Daniel realized he was looking at a person, a woman, a giant woman. She stepped out from the trees with slow, graceful movements. She was tall, far taller than any person Daniel had ever seen. Her long hair shimmered in the sunlight like dark silk, flowing down her back. Her skin looked smooth and warm-toned, with a glow that reminded him of polished wood. She wore simple clothing made from large, stitched pieces of fabric that fit her broad frame. Her eyes were soft, curious, and surprisingly gentle. She was enormous, but not frightening. Her shadow stretched across the field, and her footsteps created the same rhythmic tremors Daniel had been hearing for days. For a moment, Daniel stood completely still, unsure of what to do. Should he wave? Should he speak? Should he step back? But the giant woman stopped at a distance, kneeling slightly so she didn't tower over him too much. It was a careful, respectful gesture, as though she didn't want him to feel overwhelmed. Her voice, when she spoke, was deep but warm, like the sound of distant thunder softened by clouds. "You are the new keeper of this land." Daniel swallowed, his voice catching in his throat for a second before he finally managed to respond. I bought the farm," he said softly, "but I didn't know anyone else lived here." The giant woman smiled, a small, understanding smile that made her look surprisingly kind. "We have lived here long before your houses were built," she said. "Long before fences or roads or towns. This valley is our home, our family's land." Another shape appeared behind her, and Daniel's eyes widened. A second giant woman emerged from the trees, slightly shorter than the first, but still far larger than any human. Her hair was lighter, and she had a thoughtful expression, studying him with steady eyes. A moment later, a third figure arrived, the tallest of them all, with braided hair and a calm, almost serene presence. She carried herself like someone who had seen many seasons pass and understood the rhythm of the earth. 3 giant women. And they all stood before him, watching him, studying him, trying to understand the man who had stepped into their valley and claimed the land they had cherished for generations. Daniel felt his breath catch. His mind raced with questions, but he didn't feel fear, just awe. Deep, quiet awe. The first woman, the one who had spoken, placed a gentle hand on the ground, her palm flat against the soil. The earth trembled slightly under the weight, but the gesture was slow and peaceful, almost like offering a handshake from a distance. "I am Mara," she said kindly. "These are my sisters, Elin and Tessa." The second woman nodded politely. "We mean you no harm," Elin said, her voice softer and lighter. "We saw you arrive, we watched from the trees, we wanted to understand who you are." The third sister, Tessa, looked at Daniel thoughtfully. "Many humans leave when they notice us," she said, "but you stayed." Daniel took a careful breath. "I didn't know what to expect, but I think this land felt welcoming, even when I didn't understand what was happening." Mara's smile widened. "The land remembers those who treat it with respect." Elin added gently, "We noticed you fixing the house. You remove old boards with care, you walk the fields with patience, you think before you act." Tessa tilted her head slightly. "Most humans hurry. They take from the land without listening, but you listen." Daniel felt warmth rising in his chest. He wasn't used to receiving such thoughtful observations, especially from beings as extraordinary as these giant sisters. "I'm just trying to rebuild my life," he said honestly. This place felt like a chance to start over. For a moment, the giant sisters exchanged looks, not worried, but curious, as if they were silently discussing him without speaking words. Then Mara said gently, "This farm belonged to our family many generations ago. But humans came and the papers changed hands. We retreated into the mountains so both our worlds could exist peacefully. But we never stopped caring for the valley," Elin added. "We still walk the land, we still keep it safe." Daniel nodded slowly. "That explains the footprints and the stacked wood and the footsteps I kept hearing." Tessa chuckled softly, a deep, friendly sound. "We tried not to disturb you too much, we were careful, but you noticed anyway." "I did," Daniel admitted with a small smile. The giant sisters studied him for another long moment. Daniel could almost feel the weight of their thoughts, not in a heavy way, but in a thoughtful, assessing way. They weren't judging him. They were simply trying to understand whether he belonged here. Finally, Mara spoke again. "This valley is our home," she said gently, "but we do not wish to drive you away. We want only to know whether you respect this land as we do." Daniel hesitated for only a second before he answered. "I do," he said softly, "more than anything. I came here because I needed a place that felt alive, a place worth caring for. I want to work with the land, not against it." A warm breeze moved through the field at that moment, as though nature itself approved of his words. The tall grass whispered gently. The sunlight brightened, Elin's expression softened. "We believed this might be true," Tessa nodded. "You do not fear us, that is rare." Daniel chuckled quietly. "I mean, I'm surprised but not afraid." The 3 sisters looked at each other, and Daniel sensed a silent agreement pass between them. Mara leaned forward slightly, her voice warm and kind. "Then perhaps we do not need to hide any more." Daniel felt something shift inside him, something hopeful and extraordinary. He watched as the 3 giant sisters stepped a little closer, their presence large but gentle. And in that moment, something unspoken settled between them, a beginning, the beginning of understanding, the beginning of trust. The beginning of a strange and beautiful connection between one ordinary man and 3 extraordinary women who had watched over the valley long before he ever arrived. Daniel didn't know what the future held. He didn't know why fate had led him to this land, or why these giant sisters had chosen this moment to reveal themselves. But he did know one thing. His life and the valley itself had just changed forever. After meeting the 3 giant sisters, Daniel felt like the world around him had subtly changed. The valley was still quiet, the breeze still gentle, the trees still standing tall, and yet everything felt different. As if the land had opened a secret door and invited him to step through it. The morning light seemed warmer, the grass seemed brighter. Even the house seemed to stand a little straighter, as though it too was curious about this new chapter. The sisters Myra, Elin, and Tessa had not stayed long that day. They spoke to him kindly, listened carefully to his words, and watched him with thoughtful eyes. Then, with slow, graceful movements, they returned to the shelter of the tall trees and disappeared into the shadows of the forest. Their footsteps caused soft tremors that faded gently into the distance. Daniel stood in the field long after they left, letting the moment settle inside him. He felt no fear. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. But even though he now understood the truth about his land, he also knew that not everyone in the valley would understand the sisters the way he did. The townspeople had warned him. Their cautious looks made sense now. The valley wasn't simply quiet, it was protected, hidden. Shared by beings far older and larger than anyone could imagine. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to go about his work normally. He repaired more of the porch, cleared weeds from the front garden, cleaned old tools, and made small improvements inside the house. But every so often, he would hear a distant step, see the tall grass shift in a strange pattern, or catch a shadow moving gently along the edge of the forest. He knew one or more of the sisters were near, watching him as he worked. And strangely, their silent presence never felt intrusive. It felt comforting, like having guardians nearby. One afternoon, as he was repairing a broken shutter, he heard a soft hum in the air. Not a song exactly, but a low, soothing tone that traveled gently across the valley. When he looked up, he saw Elin walking along the boundary between the forest and the open field. She carried a long branch in her hand, sweeping it lightly across the ground as she walked. Wherever she passed, the grass seemed to straighten itself, as though responding to her touch. Daniel placed his hammer down and raised a hand to greet her. Elin noticed him and paused. She smiled softly and took a step toward him, her large feet pressing gently into the earth without disturbing it too much. "You work with great care," she said in her warm voice. "I'm trying," Daniel replied, a bit shy. "I want to take good care of the house." "You are doing well," Elin said kindly. "This land responds to gentle hands. It has been waiting a long time for someone who listens." Daniel felt a warm flush of pride. "Thank you, I don't know much about farming yet, but I'm learning." Elin nodded thoughtfully. "Learning is more valuable than knowing." Just then, from deeper in the forest, a soft whistle echoed. Elin lifted her head, listened, then turned back to Daniel. "My sisters call for me," she said. "Is everything all right?" Daniel asked. Her smile returned. "Yes. We are preparing for the season's change. The valley always shifts a little before the weather does." He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he nodded politely. "I hope to see you again soon." "You will," she promised. With that, Elin stepped back toward the forest, her footprints creating soft impressions in the earth that disappeared moments later as the grass gently rose behind her. Daniel returned to his repairs, but her words stayed with him. The valley shifts when the season changes. The idea felt poetic, almost magical. He wondered how deeply the sisters understood nature, whether they could feel small changes in the wind, the soil, or the air long before humans noticed. That evening, after the sun set and stars filled the sky, Daniel sat on his porch drinking tea. The night was cool, filled with the sound of crickets. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly. He leaned back in his chair, letting his thoughts drift peacefully. That was when he heard the sound of footsteps, slow, careful, and familiar. He didn't move, though his heart sped up a little. After a moment, a large but gentle shadow appeared along the edge of the field. It was Tessa. She approached with calm steps, stopping at a respectful distance. Her braided hair shimmered faintly in the moonlight. She carried something in her hand, a woven basket made from smooth branches, shaped with surprising skill for someone her size. "You are awake," Tessa said, her voice low and calming. "I couldn't sleep," Daniel admitted, "just thinking about everything." She placed the basket on the ground near him, careful not to create a loud sound. "For you," she said. Daniel stood slowly and approached the basket. Inside, he saw large fruits, berries, and nuts he'd never seen before. Some were bright orange, others deep purple. They looked fresh, clean, and almost glowing with natural color. "I gathered these for you," Tessa said. "They grow only in parts of the forest where the soil is strongest." Daniel swallowed with gratitude. "Thank you, this is really kind of you." "We wish to help," she replied simply. "You take care of your home, so we will help take care of you." He felt touched by her sincerity. "I appreciate that, truly." Tessa lowered herself slightly so she wasn't towering over him too much. "The valley is shared now, by you and by us. What happens to you matters to us as well." Daniel nodded. "I want to respect this land. I want to understand it better." "You will," Tessa said, "with time." She stood again, tall and strong, but still calm as flowing water. "Rest well, Daniel." Then she walked back into the night, her steps leaving only soft tremors behind. The next morning, Daniel brought a few of the fruits inside and tasted one. It was sweet, mild, and refreshing, unlike anything he'd eaten before. He felt energized afterward, ready to work. But that day brought a shift he hadn't expected. As he worked near the barn, tightening loose boards and organizing the interior, he heard voices, not from the forest, but from the road at the front of the farm. Human voices. Curious, he stepped out and followed the sound. As he reached the fence line, he saw 3 men standing on the road, talking among themselves. They stared at his property with troubled expressions. Daniel approached calmly. "Morning," he said politely. The men turned to look at him. One of them, a tall fellow with a gray jacket, asked, "You're the new owner, right? The one who bought the Harper farm?" "That's me," Daniel replied. The men exchanged looks. "You've seen things, haven't you?" the man in the jacket said. Daniel hesitated. "What things?" The man's expression tightened. "Strange signs, footprints, sounds, shadows at night." Daniel stayed quiet, trying to understand their intentions. Another man, shorter with sandy hair, stepped closer. "Listen," he said earnestly, "we're not trying to scare you. We're trying to warn you. People don't live on that land for a reason." "What reason?" Daniel asked softly. The sandy-haired man exhaled slowly. "There are beings there, large ones, from the old stories." Daniel's heartbeat quickened, but he kept his face neutral. "What kind of beings?" he asked. "Giant women," the first man said in a near whisper. "They don't come near town anymore, but they've been seen near the mountains. Some say they still roam the deeper parts of the valley." The second man added, "We just don't want anything to happen to you. Most people who notice signs pack up and leave." Daniel looked at them steadily. "What makes you think they're dangerous?" The men exchanged unsure glances. "Well, they're huge," the man in the jacket finally said, "and that's enough reason to worry." Daniel nodded slowly. "I appreciate your concern," he said gently. "Truly, but I haven't had any trouble. I'm fine here." The men didn't seem convinced, but after a moment they gave him polite nods and walked away, murmuring quietly among themselves. As they left, Daniel's mind filled with thoughts. The Valley Council, the townspeople, the quiet warnings, it all made sense now. They feared the sisters, not because of anything the sisters had done, but because they didn't understand them. And Daniel understood something important. That afternoon, Daniel walked toward the forest edge. He didn't call out, he simply stood there in the sunlight, waiting quietly. It wasn't long before he saw movement. Myra emerged from the trees. Her expression was calm, but her deep eyes held a quiet tension. She had clearly sensed the visit from the townspeople. "You have had visitors," Mara said gently. Daniel nodded. "They were worried about me?" "They fear us," Mara said. "They fear what they do not understand." Daniel took a breath. "I don't want anything to happen to any of you. And I don't want the people in town to panic." Mara looked at him with understanding. "That is why we have stayed hidden for so long. But if we don't talk to them," Daniel said softly, "they'll never know the truth." Mara studied him with steady, thoughtful eyes. "You believe understanding is possible." "I do," Daniel said firmly. "I think the valley could be shared peacefully, truly shared." Mara's expression softened, filled with respect. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps change begins with one person who listens." She stepped closer, lowering herself gracefully to reduce the height difference. "We will not ask you to choose between our world and theirs," Mara said gently. "But understand, there may come a moment when both sides expect you to stand with them. That moment will not be easy." Daniel's voice was steady. "If it comes, I'll do what feels right for everyone." Mara nodded slowly. That is all anyone can do. The sky began to darken as evening approached. Birds circled above, returning to their nests. Myra stood again, tall and strong. "We will speak with our sisters," she said, "and we will watch. The valley is changing, and you, Daniel, are part of that change." As she walked back into the forest, Daniel felt the weight of her words settle inside him, not heavy like a burden, but deep like a responsibility. He knew the coming days would not be simple. He knew the Valley Council would grow suspicious. And he knew the sisters were stepping into the open after years in the shadows. A fragile bridge had formed between two worlds. And Daniel stood quietly at the center of it, hoping it wouldn't break. The valley was calm that morning, but Daniel could feel a quiet tension in the air. The sun was rising slowly, painting the distant mountains with soft gold and pink. Everything looked peaceful, almost ordinary, yet he knew better. The valley had been alive in ways most people could never understand, and today that life would become more visible than ever. He stepped outside and breathed in the fresh air. The grass swayed lightly in the morning breeze, the trees stood tall and silent, and somewhere in the distance, the soft sound of a stream whispered over stones. For a moment, Daniel felt the kind of peace he had not known in years. The farm felt like it belonged to him, but he knew it also belonged to others, beings who had walked these lands long before humans even arrived. He remembered Mara's words from the day before. "The valley is changing, and you, Daniel, are part of that change." Daniel didn't fully know what that meant yet, but he sensed the truth behind it. Something important was about to happen. He felt it in the gentle vibrations beneath his feet, in the way the air seemed to shimmer slightly, and in the soft light that danced across the hills. As he walked toward the barn, he noticed a figure emerging from the forest. It was Elin. Her presence was calm and welcoming. Her footsteps caused small, soft tremors that seemed almost playful, like the earth itself was greeting him. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, her deep voice gentle and musical. "Morning," he replied, smiling. "Are the others here?" Elin nodded. "Mara and Tessa are preparing the eastern field. Something is coming. You should see for yourself soon." Daniel's curiosity piqued. "What is coming?" Elin tilted her head slightly, her expression softening. "A test, a moment that will decide whether the valley can be shared peacefully with everyone who lives here." Daniel felt his heart beat faster. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but he trusted Elin. She had shown him kindness, patience, and understanding, and he felt a deep respect for her and her sisters. Together, they walked toward the eastern field. Daniel's boots sank slightly into the soft, moist soil. The grass, though tall and wild, seemed to part gently as they passed, like it recognized the importance of the moment. When they arrived, Daniel stopped in his tracks. Mara and Tessa were already there, standing side by side near a wide clearing. Their immense size made them appear almost regal. Between them, the earth seemed to hum softly, as if it recognized their presence. Daniel noticed something extraordinary. From the forest's edge, the townspeople had gathered, though they were careful to stay back. They looked unsure, hesitant, and yet strangely curious. He realized that word of the sisters' presence had traveled quickly through the valley, and now everyone wanted to witness the truth. Some of the villagers whispered among themselves, some pointed quietly. But all of them seemed to hold their breath, as though they were waiting for something incredible to happen. Daniel felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He knew this could be the moment when everything changed, not just for him, but for the valley and its people. Mara stepped forward first. Her movement was slow, deliberate, and full of grace. She raised her hands slightly, and Daniel noticed the soft tremors increase, not in a frightening way, but as if the land itself was responding. The grass swayed, the trees seemed to bend slightly toward her, and even the wind seemed to pause in reverence. "People of Redwood Valley," Mara said, her voice deep but calm, carrying across the field so that everyone could hear. "We have lived in this valley for generations, long before your homes, long before your roads. We are its guardians, not its enemies. We have watched over it while remaining hidden because we wished for peace." A quiet murmur spread among the villagers. Some looked skeptical, some amazed. Daniel stood quietly near the edge of the clearing, watching the giant sisters with a sense of awe. Elin stepped forward next. She bent slightly to the ground, her large hand brushing gently across the soil. Wherever she touched, the earth seemed to brighten. "We do not wish harm. We only ask for understanding. We care for the valley as you care for your homes, your families, your gardens. It has been a home for all of us long before you knew our names." Tessa, the tallest of the three, stepped into the light. Her braided hair swung lightly over her shoulder. She looked at the villagers with calm, steady eyes. This land is alive. Its trees, rivers, and fields have their own memory. We have kept it safe for centuries. Today, we step forward so that all may know the truth. Daniel could feel the energy in the valley shift. The air felt lighter, the sunlight warmer, and even the villagers seemed to grow calmer. Their expressions softened, and some of the children took cautious steps closer, drawn by curiosity rather than fear. One of the older villagers, a man with silver hair and kind eyes, spoke up. "We've always wondered who has been watching over us, who has kept the valley safe when storms came and animals wandered." Mara nodded slightly. "It has been us, but we remained hidden because we wished to live without causing fear. Today we reveal ourselves so that the valley may grow in understanding, not in fear." Daniel felt a warmth spread through him. He realized that this moment was bigger than just him, bigger than the farm. It was about the valley itself, the land, the people, and the guardians who had lived alongside them for generations. He stepped forward and spoke gently. "These women are not a threat. They care for this land as much as any of us. We can learn from them. We can work together." Some of the villagers nodded slowly, though others still looked unsure. Daniel smiled and added, "We've seen their care already. The land thrives because of them, even when we didn't know they were here. If we let fear guide us, we lose the chance to understand something extraordinary." The giant sisters nodded in approval. Mara's smile was warm, Elin's eyes bright, and Tessa's gaze steady and calm. Daniel felt a sense of pride mixed with awe. He had found not only friendship, but also a bridge between two worlds. Then something remarkable happened. The sisters began to move across the field, their steps slow and careful. Each footfall created small tremors, but the earth responded gently. Flowers seemed to lift their heads, grasses swayed, and even the sunlight shimmered in response. Daniel watched, amazed, as Mara, Elin, and Tessa worked together to restore parts of the field that had been worn down by time and neglect. What would have taken a team of humans weeks or months was completed in minutes by their careful efforts. The grass straightened, the soil became smooth, and the natural patterns of the land seemed to realign as if awakened from a long slumber. The villagers watched in silence, slowly realizing that what they feared was actually a force of care and balance. Daniel noticed that some children had crept closer, their eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. When the sisters finished, they turned toward the crowd, smiles gentle and calm. Mara spoke first. "See what care can do? Fear destroys, but understanding nurtures. This valley is not divided. It belongs to all who love it, human and guardian alike." The silver-haired man stepped forward. "I see it now," he said quietly. "We've been too cautious, too afraid. We didn't understand, but I see that now." Other villagers nodded, their expressions softening. Conversations began quietly, questions asked and answered. Daniel noticed smiles appearing where there had once been suspicion. The valley was changing in small but profound ways, and it was beautiful to witness. Later, Daniel walked toward the sisters. "Thank you," he said softly, "for showing them the truth, for trusting me, and for being here." Mara nodded. "You listened, you understood. That is why you are here, why you remain. The land chose you as much as we have remained its guardians." Elin added, "Patience, care, and respect. These are the ways to keep the valley alive. You have them, Daniel." Tessa smiled faintly. "The valley will thrive because you will help it thrive. And because we are no longer hidden." Daniel looked at the three women, their immense presence gentle and kind. For a moment, he realized that life had given him something far beyond what he expected. Not just a home, not just a farm, but a connection to a world older and wiser than his own. Days turned into weeks, and the valley slowly adjusted to this new harmony. Daniel repaired the house, tended the fields, and learned from the sisters about the rhythms of the land. Together, they planted gardens, cleared overgrown paths, and even helped villagers understand the magic of careful stewardship. Children came to see the sisters with delight rather than fear. The villagers grew more comfortable, learning that respect and curiosity could replace worry and suspicion. The valley became a place where two worlds lived together, not as strangers, but as neighbors and friends. One evening, Daniel stood on his porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. The sisters had returned to the forest, but their presence lingered in the fields, in the grass, and in the gentle vibrations beneath his feet. He breathed in the warm evening air and smiled. The valley was alive, it was beautiful, And it was no longer just his home. It was a shared world, full of wonder, trust, and respect. And Daniel knew deep in his heart that he had found a place where he could finally belong.